Hello, and welcome to Organic Cardboard. My name is Owen Kniep, and today I want to take a look at Fall of the Mountain King. Fall of the Mountain King was produced by Burnt Island Games at the end of 2022. It's rated for ages 14 and up. It's for 1 to 5 players, and it has a suggested play time at being 30 minutes per player. Now, I would at least double that on your first game because this is a bit of a thinker. It would be considered a medium weight game, and this is actually the sequel to its prequel, which is called In the Hall of the Mountain King. In the Hall of the Mountain King was a game that was produced by Burnt Island Games in 2019, and it has the same theme, and the theme between the two that they share is trolls. So you are trolls that are good trolls, and you are dealing with nasty, bad gnomes that have just kind of ruined your lives in one way or another. And so, in the Hall of the Mountain King, the game, aside from theme, is completely different than Fall of the Mountain King. And in the Hall of the Mountain King, what you're going to be doing is placing polyomino pieces as you're re-excavating out the troll kingdom mountain after it's been ransacked and collapsed and everything's just a mess inside. You're going in to kind of reclaim your old glory and re-excavate out these great halls and things and statues that are going to produce honor for you as you go. Now, Fall of the Mountain King, what you're going to be doing there instead is playing out this final stand, this last big battle that occurred with the trolls against these gnomes. There is no actual king in the game. You're just a group of trolls. You do have champion trolls that are going to have special abilities and may even have their own little character on the board, but otherwise they're going to be integral to your success during the game. So in Fall of the Mountain King, you are going to have a board that is separated out into caverns that are going to be competed for the dominance of each of those caverns. And so you are dealing with a common enemy, which is again the gnomes, but you're otherwise this is not a cooperative game. You may benefit each other a little bit by killing gnomes, but most of the time you're just going to be kind of wrestling with each other to claim dominance over these caverns so that you can score more points at the end of each one of the rounds. So there's the game's composed of 3 rounds, and these rounds again are considered to be waves of gnomes that happen at the end of everybody being, once everybody's finished all the turns that they can take, then one of these waves begins. And so during the waves, you may or may not know where these gnomes are going to show up at. You may have revealed information as you went through the round, but otherwise you're trying to set yourself up in a way that maybe you're going to allow yourself to take some casualties because you do get points for actually getting killed during a wave, unless it's a breach, and breaches are like mini waves that happen in the middle of a round, and in those cases you may be trying to set up your neighbor to kind of take some hits without actually getting any points. So there's a little bit of this kind of back and forth and maybe a little take that built into it, but otherwise it's an area control game where the most points is the one that wins. So we're going to go over the rules of the game. I want to give this to you in as natural a way as possible so that you can understand them just like you would if somebody was teaching this to you at a board game meetup. The only thing that I want you to probably have to still use the rule book for, because I find myself always having to use the rule book for this, is the setup. And so regardless of any time I've watched a how to play video, it seems like I always have to go through the rule book for the setup. But I'm going to have the board already set up for you here, and I'll go over a little bit of quick description over how the board is set up, but otherwise we'll just get right into the meat and potatoes of the rules, and that way you can get to playing the game as soon as possible. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get to the overview of the board, and I'll be back with you in just a moment. Okay, so here we've got the game set up for a two-player game. We've got yellow and pink as the player characters, and I don't want to go over the setup too much as far as each one of the individual steps, because I feel like you're probably going to want to just read that out of the instruction manual. I know I always find that I have to do that myself, but I do want to briefly go over just the general layout of what I do have set out here, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the actual rules. So here we've got the main board. We've got the stacks that have the different champions for the different waves. You'll see that I've got the stack of the zero champions. Those are the ones that come out during setup. We really don't need those out right now, but I have it set up just for clarity. Around the outside here we have the clan board, the gnome wheel, these wave cards set out for the round, and then our player areas here with the champion selection in the middle. So the first big thing that I want to go over is the map itself, because I want you to understand what is going on, what you're looking at here, because this looks like a big smattering of a bunch of stuff right now. First things first, around the edge of the map we've got a point tracker, and the goal of this game is points, and so whoever has the most points at the end is going to be the winner. So that's what you're looking for, and this track is going to allow you to keep track of the points that you might be getting during a round or at the end of a round, and then you'll get a bunch of final scoring points at the very end. But this lets you keep track in between. So on the board we've got 7 different colored areas, and those are referred to as domains. And within each domain we either have 3 or 4 caverns. It doesn't necessarily mean that one area is more powerful than the others as far as the number of caverns go. It's just the way that it ends up laying out. And so each one of these domains has a name associated with the color as well. So we've got the moss domain, and the ice, the moon, the granite, the hammers, the mud, fire, yeah, and so that's all 7 of them. So the other big thing that you see on the map right now too is all these numbered tokens. You don't really have to worry about those too much, at least on the first round. They only actually come into play at the end of the game. So those are referred to as great halls, and wherever you have the most dominance, if you dominate the most caverns around each one of these great halls, you'll get those points at the end of the game, but otherwise they're not worth anything in the middle of the game. The other things that you'll see around the board here too are these little colored what they call gates, and these swarm locations. So these swarm locations refer to this swarm miniature, or if you have the retail version you will have more of a token rather than a miniature setup like that. In fact, on the sheet right here this shows the difference and some of the components for the retail versus the Kickstarter edition. So the retail version uses cubes for all the action markers and little discs instead of some of these other more differentiated tokens here as well. But it should be pretty easy for you to be able to pick up the difference between one copy or the other if you do have the retail version. Okay, so again, with the Kickstarter version we do have a little miniature, and so this guy's basically going to act as a reference point whenever you're having gnomes enter into the mountain on any of these locations, which will happen whenever we trigger either what is called a breach, or at the end of the round we're going to have these cards that are going to
get flipped over, and they're going to have a certain area that the spawn location will, the swarm token will go to in order to show you what gates the gnomes can enter in from. So all of these colors actually just have one gate except for the mud and the moss, because there's 2 points at which those gnomes could enter the board, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Otherwise, that pretty much covers the board itself. Now on the board we also have the player setup. At the beginning of the setup, whoever you decide is going to be the first player will get the choice of where to put a layer at first, and whenever you select one layer location, which is what these little kind of grayed out areas are that have a little symbol with them, there's going to be a matching symbol layer location, and that's why there's another one here for pink that matches those 2 symbols match each other. So the same thing's going on with yellow. And then they get to have an extra, they start with 3 of these trolls in that layer. That layer kind of acts as like a spawn point for you to always be able to bring trolls out if you don't dominate a cavern, because otherwise you have to have a dominated cavern in order to bring them out on the board. You do get to start with 1 extra guy though too, adjacent to your layer, as long as there's no other gnomes that are in that cavern as well. So that covers the board itself. Now going around to the clan board here, you're going to see these reference to each one of these domains that are on the board, and you're going to gain votes in the clan board, these different tracks, depending on where you've gained dominance. So anytime you gain dominance over a new cavern, that means that your turn started without dominance in a cavern, and at the end of a turn that you took, at the end of an action, you gain dominance. Whenever that happens, you'll gain 1 vote for any one of these colored caverns that you gained new dominance for. If somebody else moves into your cavern after that, they'll also get that point if they then have more trolls than you do in that location. But otherwise, the only other way that you're getting points on the clan board is if you gain new champions. Now when you start the game, you're going to have a starting champion. We selected 2 cards from the stack, the 0 stack over there for the setup, and then from those 2 you get to pick 1 to keep. So anytime you get a champion, whether it's the very beginning of the game or at the end of the round after the wave happens, you'll be able to gain these champions depending on if you've influenced them the most or not. In the top left corner, it's going to show one of the domain types, and you're going to get a certain point value based off of whatever the numbers are that go along with that as well, and that will move you further up these tracks. So as it is starting out, the pink has 1 point in mud and yellow has 2 points in fire. Otherwise, there's no other votes on the clan board just yet, but as soon as you gain a clan vote, you'll just put one of the clan vote trackers, little tokens on that board in order to keep track of it. The other thing to notice about the clan board, though, is that whoever has the highest number of votes in each one of these tracks is going to get this larger number that's associated with these tokens. These change every time you set up the game. You're going to have a random assortment of or a random placement of these on the clan board. The person who is in first is going to get that highest number, and there'll always only be 1 person in first. So if 2 people end up sharing the same spot on the track, like if pink was to get 2 votes in fire, yellow is still in first because yellow was there first. So pink actually has to surpass yellow in order to then be first. And then if yellow gets another 1 vote, yellow is still not in first at that point. If the game ended in a situation like this, pink would get 9 points here and yellow would get 5. And then if you had 3 people that you're playing with, the third person's going to get the last number there. And then if you're playing with 4 or 5 people, then they're just out of luck if they don't get within that top 3. So going below the clan board, we have the gnome wheel over here, and that's going to be the most complicated action you can take on your turn. So we'll go into in depth on how that works and momentarily. Again, we have these wave these locations in which the waves are going to take place at the end of the round. So at the you're gonna have 3 rounds during the whole game, and at the end of each round you have a wave that happens, and the wave is gonna include a certain number of places, like we mentioned before, at each of these spawn locations. Gnomes are going to be entering into these caverns. When they do that, they are you're going to flip these over from left to right, and in a 2 to 3 player game, you're going to have 3 of these, and then I think you'll have a little bit more if you have a 4 or 5 player game of these locations that these gnomes are going to show up at. And when you look at these two, they're also going to have a number on each one of these burst symbols here, and that refers to how many gnomes are going to come out on each wave. So on if this was wave 1, the end of round 1, which would be wave 1, 2 gnomes are going to come out on each one of these locations. And then for the second round, at the end of that wave, there'll be 3, and then 4 on the third wave. So we'll be looking for those to come out later on. Then going in each one of these player areas, we've got the supply track that's going to show how many actions you can basically take during your turn. So every time you take an action, you'll move this down just a little bit. So you'll go down 1 for each one, unless you do an increased stronger action, which we'll get over what that does. But in general, wherever this is at the beginning of a round, that's how many turns you can take. This is your Ancestry board, which is going to be where all of your actions are taking place. Whenever you take actions, you're going to cover up symbols on your clan board or your Ancestry board here. And you can cover up ones that are connected together. So you're basically going to take 2 types of actions whenever you use whenever it's your turn. You're taking an action on your Ancestry board here. You can either take a weak action or a strong action. Now when you take a weak action, you can actually take 2 of those. Now, what those refer to is that anytime you take an action that has a power of 2 or higher, that becomes a strong action. So all of these symbols that have just a 2 on them can never be a weak action. They'll always be a strong action. But when you take these actions, the way that's going to happen is you're going to cover them up with these little action cubes, depending on how strong your action that you want to make it. So you can add these all together. This could be a 2, and then plus you could add all these together if you wanted to, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll get to what these actions actually mean, but I just want to show how this action placement works. So if you could take this is called an advance action, and if you're taking this advance action at a strength of 5 like this, you can do so by connecting all these together. Now on a later turn, these will actually bridge these other locations that weren't connected to start off with. So these are called influence actions. You could take the influence action with a power of 3 by adding these 2 together at that point. And you could even add this one together because it's bridged from this one right here. So as you go on this Ancestry board, these are going to start getting covered up, and eventually you're not going to have things that you can do on your turn. But one thing you can do whenever you're taking a strong action, because it's 2 or higher, you can also spend extra supplies. So when you take that first strong action that we showed, of 5 here, you'll move this down 1. If you wanted to, like if you added extra supplies at the end, you could spend an extra one of those supplies in order to increase that to 6 if you wanted. But it's kind of desperate to do that because these are going to take down the turns that you're going to be able to do in a round, but sometimes you're going to have situations where it might make sense to do so. But a lot of the times it's better to just take a weak action, because when you take a weak action, you can actually take 2 weak actions on your turn and only spend 1 supply to do so. So when you spend one of these supplies down any of these spots that don't have a 2 on it, we can play as 2 separate actions, and they actually don't even have to be connected. So I could do an influence action here and an advance action down here, and those could be 2 weak actions. You're going to start the game with, or to start each round with a certain number of these desperation tokens. So whereas the strong action can be increased by wasting your supplies for it, the weak actions can be increased with desperation tokens. So normally when you start on this board, you're going to have a starting point that your supplies are sitting at that will be different for each round. So for round 1 you start with 6, for round 2 you start with 5, for round 3 you're starting with 4, so it kind of simulates that you're running out of supplies as these gnomes keep kind of pounding the mountain that you're trying to protect. But on your board there are ways to increase that a little bit. So you're going to have these little supply symbols are one of the main ways that you can increase that. So for every one of these that show up, you'll be able to increase that a little bit. So normally this would start at 6, but actually on both of these board setups, the way we did it is that they both have an extra supply, so they'll actually start at 7. Now the reason why I'm mentioning all that again too is that we were talking about desperation tokens. So to the right of wherever you'll see these little +1 markers referring to those desperation tokens, wherever this is placed at the beginning of the round, you'll get a number of desperation tokens equal to the number that are showing to the right of your supply tracker. So if we actually didn't have this symbol, if that wasn't showing up and we started at 6, that first round you'd actually get 2 desperation tokens, but we only get 1 as it is. Okay, so let's get to talking about how these Ancestry boards are actually constructed. So at the beginning of the game, everybody's going to have this same card, and this card is going to have the 4 basic actions you're going to be able to take during each of the turns. This will be in your player area, and you will get 4 cards from the stack of the Ancestry board cards over there. Each one of those is a little 2x2 card, and these, when they're placed, they have to be placed on top of at least 1 square of your already existing Ancestry board. So again, this is the one that everybody's starting with, and the way ours was built out is we actually placed this one here first. Now, when those are placed, well, first thing that happens is, again, you get 4 of those cards, and you're going to go through a draft with those 4 from that Ancestry pile. At the end of it, you're going to have 3 cards put down, so every time you draft one, look at those 4, pick one, then you're going to pass them off clockwise to the next player. If you're playing a 2-player game, obviously you're just switching those back and forth. So every time you select one, you do have to place it on the board to start off with. So you're always going to be covering over symbols. So you're going to find times, especially in the 2nd and 3rd round, you're going to start covering over stuff that you don't really want to cover, but you're going to have to cover them. And again, they have to be placed before you get your next drafted card. So you're going to also be limited to a 6x6 grid here. So I know normally we'd need a little bit more space, but to keep it all in the camera here, I just kind of condensed it down. But normally you would want to have at least enough room to make a 6x6 square. when you do that too, you can't ever have like one of these hanging outside of that 6x6 square and just say, oh, I'm just not using these symbols that are hanging out. They have to all stay contained within that 6x6 grid, unless you have some special power that lets you go bigger than that. I know at least one of the champions that you can start with actually allows you to build a larger Ancestry board. Now, as we look at this board setup, then I've already placed all of these out. I'll show you exactly how each one of these was placed. So we started with the base. My first draft for yellow, we picked this one and placed it here. On the second draft for yellow, we placed this one here. These little spaces are kind of nice because that means I'm not going to have to cover any other symbols up. And I know I've got a free space, and I placed that third one here. On pink, we started with the base Ancestry board, and then we placed this one here. We had two easy locations to be able to place new symbols at without covering anything else up. So these spaces aren't necessarily bad to have. It's good for future planning for what you're going to be doing with your board later on. So now we're going to go through the most complicated portion of this whole video, which is going to be explaining what actions you can actually take. So we're going to go through the easiest ones, and then we'll get to the hardest one, which is the Gnome action, or at least it's just the most complicated. None of it's really difficult, but some of these concepts can be a little unintuitive at first, but they'll make sense pretty quick. This bolster symbol is the shield symbol here. That's the most simple thing. So that's just when you're adding new trolls onto the board. Whenever you take an action of a certain power level, what that means is that's usually referring to a number of whatever. If this is the bolster action, that's the number of trolls that are getting placed on the board. The advance action is how many trolls are getting to move. And the influence is how many influence points you get to put down at a time. So whatever the power is, if we were taking this bolster action, first thing we would do is we would move the supplies down, and because it's a strong action, it's the only thing we'll be able to do on this turn. We'll place one of these action cubes over that, and that will allow you to put again 2 trolls out. So if yellow's taking that action, you put 2 trolls out, and these trolls are going to have to go in somewhere that you dominate. So you can place them. You could place them in a layer. You could crowd these layers up. The layers don't really do much for you, other than just give you a free space to put your guys at. So even if you didn't have any trolls there later on in the game, you could always start these off here if you wanted to. But any of these locations where you have one of your trolls at, you could also bolster by putting those 2 there. But you can't ever put them like in an empty space unless there's some special power that you might get from a champion that allows you to do so. You're never going to be able to break that rule. So we're friendly with each other here. We're never directly attacking the other players on the board. But even though pink has this space, I can't bolster my characters into there, which I'm sure makes sense to you right now. If we shared locations too, I could also still not do this. This would not be allowed. So you can only put them in the locations that you actually dominate by having the most trolls there. And of course, we're never going to be bolstering directly into anywhere that there's a gnome at. And gnomes will always be by themselves. You're never going to see a situation where you've got one of the players' trolls here, except for one special champion that kind of acts as a spy, and he can do a little bit of that. But otherwise, you're never going to see that happen. So bolster's the most simple thing. Influence, when you take the influence action, again, don't forget you always have to move a supply down anytime you're taking one of these actions. And this would be on a separate turn, of course, if we did the bolster and then we went to influence. This would be after pink got to make their first turn. So we move that down again. We place one on the influence action. So this is an influence of 2. An influence, I know it's a little confusing because there's a hand here and these have little hand symbols here as well. But on the retail version you'll just have little discs, so maybe that'll make a little bit more sense. But this influence does not refer to points or votes on the clan board. It only refers to influencing the champions themselves. So whenever you take an influence action, say this is a power of 2, you'll take one of your influence tokens and you can choose which champion that you want to influence. The first time one of these champions is influenced during a round, you actually gain an additional point of influence with them. So if you're taking a power 2 influence action, you'll then get to put that on the 3. Now if Pink later on, after we did that action, if Pink goes, oh, I really want Kira, and she placed a marker on that influence action to take that, of course she'd be moving the supply marker down if she did so. Then if she puts that here, she does not get that extra point, so it's only the first player. It's not like the first one that you influence during the game necessarily. It's the first time it happens during a round. So she might not want to go for that, but she may want to instead, when she did that influence action, she might have actually just said, well, I'm going to go ahead and take a different one and start trying to claim and get that extra starting bonus on those influence actions. Now she could also, because she's got a lot of influence spots here on her board, she could take 2 weak actions of influence, which is what I like to do a lot of times when I'm playing a game. Is I like to spread that influence out as quick as possible. And so those would each be worth 1, but because she's the first one, she could get 2 here, and she could get 2 here on her turn, which is really nice. Because at the end of the round, after the waves have happened, we're going to look at these, and whoever has the highest on each one of these tracks will get to take this champion. And there's no tiebreakers here. It's just whoever's highest, and there's also no limitation either. So I know these only go up to 8, but if you go up to 8, just put another marker down there in one way or another where you're marking. You could either stack them and start putting them on the back on the 1 where you've got 2 instead of just the 1 down. Whatever works for you to keep track of it, but you can gain more than just the 8 here. It's the same thing on the clan board. As those votes go up for clan votes, you can go up higher than what that number is. Now when you take one of these champions, though, again at the end of the round, you'll first off you'll get to get those votes on the clan board. These, again, are all going to have a domain located shown with them, but there are a couple wild champions that are in the game. And if you see an odd symbol like this, a little question mark with the next to the number, that means that you can choose wherever you want to do your clan board votes at, which is nice. Another thing that I'll point out is that on these champions, they have a little token, well, some of them have a little token associated with them that will actually attach to your miniature or your meeple that you have for your champion, just to indicate where they're at. So if yellow was to get this at the end, yellow would gain this champion with this little token here. Now, during the setup, I left the pink's champion, which did start with one of those tokens, off the board. This would happen at the beginning during setup after she had selected this champion. This would get to be placed in one of her layers, so we could just pop it in one for right now and say that was part of the setup. Some of these champions do not have those tokens though, so they just give this, like this guy just gives you a special ability to use throughout the game, and so does Zanine here, but these two guys will actually have a figure on the board as well. So that's how influence works. Okay, so the next action that we want to go over is the advance action. So the advance action is a little bit more complicated of a movement action than what may be intuitive to you. In fact, I had to kind of splice this extra portion into the video because I messed this up the first time I was describing it. So Whenever you are taking an advance action, you are going to select one cavern for your trolls to move into. That has to be adjacent, and it has to be adjacent to established caverns that your trolls are a part of, at least a part of the this kind of like bridge or whatever that goes on as these guys are connecting into these locations. So we're friendly with each other. We can kind of help each other move around the board, but otherwise, of course, we're competing with one another for dominance of caverns and things like that, and for honor points. But anytime you do movement, again, you'll select however much movement you're going to do. You move down your supply tracker from wherever it's at. And if we're going to do let's say we're going to do an advance action of 2 with yellow. So yellow has the option at this point to move to any of these adjacent caverns, including the one that the gnome's in, and that will cause combat to happen. If that happens, it'll happen immediately as soon as that advancement is completed. But because there's this space now, this gap, they can't skip over. We can't skip over here to get like to this cavern. They have to be in again adjacency. Though, if pink had later on in the game had placed a troll here, then we can move our trolls through pink into another cavern that is adjacent to pink, as long as pink is bridging to our locations as well. So you can also even move into pink's spot too if you wanted to, and if you do so, then you'll gain dominance in that location. Well, if we did it in this way, if pink had only one troll there and we were taking an advance action with a power of 2, and we swept those guys over into pink space, then now there are more yellow trolls than pink trolls. And so we gain dominance, and at that point, as soon as that action is finished, you will gain those that 1 vote in the ice point track here. And anytime I refer to these as points and these votes, the only actual points you're going to get to score for victory points are going to be at the end of the game. So I kind of use that vote and point on this track interchangeably, but those are votes along the clan board. So if we are ever moving our trolls into a location with gnomes, then what will occur is we'll flip over the gnomes. Whatever gnome that you're going into, you're never going to have more than 2 of these gnome figures in one section at a time. But whenever you move in, you'll then see a number that is either 1, 2, or 3, and that is going to refer to the power of that gnome army. And so you just have to meet the number, and that means that your trolls are going to succeed in that battle. This gnome's going to go away. He's actually going to land over here on the gnome wheel for later for counting an action that happens on the gnome track, but we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But you will gain the points that are associated on the bottom of that gnome. So you would immediately gain 2 points along the track around the outside of the board. And then because now you have dominance in that location, you'll get an extra vote on the clan board track. So yellow would move up to 3 if that were the case. Now, if we had only moved 1 troll of yellows into this location, and we flip this over and it's a 2, that means that any trolls that you moved in, if they did not match that number, they were sort of defeated. They got to run away, though. They get to go back to one of your layers, and they can actually go back to either of your layers. Even though I pulled this troll from this layer in order to move into that section, I could actually move him all the way over into this layer as he was smack back away from the gnomes here. If that happens, one of the other penalties is that that gnome will do what they call entrenching, which means that you're going to have an extra gnome show up in that space. Now they're only going to ever entrench if there's only one gnome there to begin with. You're never going to see a space at any point on the board that has more than 2 gnome tokens or figures in it. But that space is going to be a pain in the butt to deal with 2, because that could take up to 6 trolls in order to defeat now if you didn't know what both of them were. That's something that we'll get. We'll explain that again at the end of at the beginning of the wave, at the start of the end of the round. The wave will occur, and that will also cause entrenchments to happen at any point where there's only one gnome at. But so keep that in mind with how battle works. It's a great way though to gain some extra points and to get the clan votes. But if you really want to get those clan votes quicker, you may take those weak actions. So we could take 2 weak actions, 2 advance weak actions here. And if we took the 2 advanced weak actions, then yellow instead could, where's that other guy? There he is. He could have taken these trolls and moved one over here, and then separately moved another one over here. And you see how that's working. Again, he's moving through an established cavern into a new cavern. Now he just got a vote in the Moss clan and also in the Fire clan here that you would mark on that clan board. And we'll explain how the end of round scoring happens once we get there, but you're going to get a lot of points if at the end of the round after the wave happens, if you have trolls all over the board, and especially in different types of domains too when you do so. So maybe it's you'll find that it's better to be able to take 2 weak actions than 1 strong one, but you'll certainly find times where you need to move more than 1 troll in at a time. So that brings us to the most complicated action, which is the gnome action here. So whenever you take a gnome action, this is kind of like a spying action that's getting to happen. So you're actually getting a look at, well, you get to look at one of the gnome values. So you could look at this character here, and you do that independently too. So if I was yellow and I was taking this gnome action of 2 here, even though it's a power 2, you only get to do this portion once. So I get to look at this and say, okay, I know that's a 3. Well, just in case I need to look at that again later, I can put a little marker there to indicate that I've looked at that gnome, and I'll be able to see it again at a later point. But pink will not know what that is unless pink does a gnome action or otherwise has a way in order to get to spy from a champion's ability. The other thing we get to look at is we get to look at one of the swarm locations or the wave locations. So if I get to look at this first one, I see that the first wave is going to, the first portion of the first wave is going to show up in hammers. So it's going to come to the hammer domain. And what that means is that at the end of the round, we're going to go through all 3 of these. This spawn swarm location here is going to pop in over here just to indicate where the gnomes are showing up at. And we know that 2 gnomes are going to show up into that gateway right here. So the way gnomes move is they're always going to move in the easiest way possible for them. So they don't want to move into sections with trolls if they can help it. They want to just move into empty caverns. And they also want to move into the closest caverns that they can reach. And they also bridge through each other just the same way that the trolls do. So normally you're not going to have more than 1 gnome in one of these caverns at a time. However, at the very beginning of a wave, they do entrench. So I know we're skipping ahead a little bit here, but to make this make sense a little more as we're explaining the gnome actions and what this information is really meaning to you, we're going to say that we're going to pretend that we're going through the beginning of the wave. So if these gnomes are sitting out on the board, they'll actually entrench. So they get one additional gnome next to them. Now once they're entrenched, they're not going to entrench a second time. So if in another wave later on, another round, these guys still had 2 here, they wouldn't get a third one there. But if they only have 1 there, like you're never going to be able to kill just 1 off at a time anyways, so there'll always be 2, and you have to deal with the 2 all at once. But otherwise, at the beginning of every wave, they're only going to entrench if there's just 1 gnome in the cavern. So first thing that happens is you'll see this situation here if those gnomes were still on the board at the beginning of the wave. So now we know that 2 gnomes are coming onto the board because we've got 2 on the burst symbol here, and one's going to start in that first gate, first portion that they could get to through this gate. Now we've got the 2 sections that could be anything. Since we don't have any votes on the clan board under hammer right now, you'll actually go down to the next one below that, and so pink would actually get to decide which one this is going to, because pink's then got the most number of votes in the next portion of the clan board. So that's how tiebreakers are going to work. Say pink just picks this one, she doesn't really care. One of the other things too is you'll see like sections here where there's going to be 2 gates. So if this was mud, let's say, and the swarm location was over here, you got 2 equally distant spots. If there weren't any gnomes there, you would have to decide at that point which one's going first. Once one of them was selected, then that one's full, and this is the next closest one. So because that's only 1 space in from a gate point, so you don't have to select 1 gate and then see which the distance from all of those. It's any of the 2 gates, which one's closest, as you're making those tiebreakers. Okay, so let's put this guy back over in the ice section I started with, and let's remove these gnomes because we are not actually going through the wave just yet. So once that information is revealed, then you keep that hidden. Yellow would keep that hidden, and then they would get to place one of their little markers on top of it. So at any point, if yellow wants to, yellow can look at that card again. Of course, if everybody has done gnome actions and they've looked at sections of the board, and you just leave it flipped over. If pink looks at this one, wants to know what yellow knows, then pink would be able to do that too. Let's go ahead and remove these guys off for now as well. And then when everybody knows it, yeah, you just leave it flipped up. It would make the most sense. So let's go back to what we were doing though with the gnome action. So you took the gnome action here. We got to look at 1 gnome and 1 of these wave cards. You can look at any one of the 3. It doesn't have to be in order from left to right. Then we go to the gnome wheel. And so when you go to the gnome wheel, the first thing you're going to do is think about what power the action was. So we did a power of 2. So you would move this little tracker 2 spaces away from wherever it was left at last. It starts right here where there's this little faint star symbol to indicate the starting location. After you've done movement on the wheel, then you look at what symbol this little guy's landed on, and so that landed on a bolster symbol. At that point, you would get to take a bolster action of the same power that the gnome action was that you took. So you would get to do a bolster of 2 with that. If it started here and you did the 2 over here, you get to do, well, let's get to that in just a moment, because we'll just go ahead and say really quickly this, if it was to have landed on the influence action, that does the same thing that we did on the board as well. So those are the 2 simple ones to understand. You get to just influence for 2. But if it lands on this symbol here, this is not an advance action. This is a different kind of troll movement that occurs. If it started here and we did a power 2 action and it landed over here, then what goes on with that is that instead of you picking a cavern for your trolls to move into, you pick a cavern for trolls to move out of, and that can actually also include other colors of trolls that you don't control. So if you wanted to, like let's say pink was dominating this location and you wanted to dominate it, you could bump pink out into another one. Now, at that point, end of your turn here, you ended your turn with dominance in a cavern that you didn't start your turn with, you would get that point on fire, but pink would not get any points for being moved over, even though now pink is dominating this cavern that pink didn't control before. She's not taking the turn, so pink's not gonna get those points. So those are the easier ones to understand. One other thing I'll say too is that when you do that movement out, so again, as a power of 2, we can move 2 trolls out. They can move into 2 different spots, so you could kind of burst them out of your layer right here and put one here and one here. So they don't actually have to go into the same cavern, which is a big difference from the way that advancing works. They always have to move into the same cavern, but with this one you pick one cavern in which they all move out of, not move into. So it's kind of reversed, and then in that way you can kind of use that to spread really quickly. So that's a really nice action to be able to utilize as you get yourself set up to do so throughout the game. Movement's kind of hard to make happen, so when you take these like stronger advance actions, even though you're getting to move a bunch of trolls in, you're only moving them into one cavern, which kind of stinks. But if you then utilize the gnome wheel later, you could burst them out of that cavern into all of these surrounding caverns. And when you do that, though, too, you can't move them into a gnome, what they call an overrun cavern. Overrun caverns are caverns that have gnomes in them. So you can't use that to initiate battle. The only way you're initiating battle is with the advance action. So one of the things you'll notice on this gnome wheel is that there's these 2 lines here, and these are tripwires. This is the tripwire that activates the breach, and this is a tripwire that activates this little boost track, which is a lot nicer of a tripwire. This breach is where this gnome action tends to get nasty, because every time this is breached, before you even activate the icon that you landed on, you will then have a number of gnomes enter into this mountain, almost like a wave action, similar to what goes on during the waves. But whoever activates this gnome wheel will get to, first you look at where this swarm icon this swarm token is sitting at, and that player then that moves the gnome wheel will get to decide if they want the breach to happen where that's at or up to 2 spaces away, so you get quite a bit of control on the board. There's only like two then that you couldn't reach on any one of these swarm locations. That's really the only time that this is really important to be able to keep track of, because you need to know where that's at in order to reference whenever the breaches happen. So at that point, you got that burst symbol, again shows where how many gnomes are going to come out, and we're going to have 2 gnomes come out. But like before, we were talking about if a gnome was killed and they got placed on this gnome wheel, that is going to increase the number of gnomes that show up. So you add an additional gnome into the breach for every 2 of these that are on this board, and it's rounded up. So if 1 was there, we would have 2 plus one gnome rounding up there to equal another gnome. We would have 3 gnomes show up at whatever one of these locations were that you decided to go with. If 2 were there, it would still only be 3. But if 3 were there, then it's 4. Because 2 plus 1 for every 2, so we got 3, so that's kind of more or less 1.5 gnomes additionally, and you round that up so it becomes the 2. Now, one of the big differences is that when gnomes show up from the breach and they kill other trolls, The way that's going to happen is anytime gnomes enter into a space with a troll, they kind of act like little sapiers. They just kind of explode into them, so both of them die. They just both get removed. And there'll be no points awarded to who gets killed during the breach. However, when we're doing the waves, you actually get points. So at the end of the round when we do a wave, if that troll had gotten killed, it would get some points for it. And so every troll gives you 2 points whenever they get killed. But if it's the first troll at each one of these at each one of these gate locations, then they'll get a little bit of extra points. So if this was the very first portion of this hammer wave, which I know this doesn't really make sense because the hammers are over here, but we'll just put it here for right now. If this is the very first portion of this wave, you would score 3 points on that first death, and then any additional trolls that got killed after that would be 2 points, including other colored trolls. Okay. And that actually does increase a little bit too as you look at this, because on each wave there's a little bit more points on that first troll that gets killed. So first wave you get 3 points on the first death, the second wave you get 4 points on the first death, and the third wave you get 5 points. But again, that's only the first troll of anybody's color that dies, and then every other troll beyond that's just the 2. If you have an instance where there are different colored trolls, like let's say there's 2 pinks and a yellow, and this board would look totally different for this to happen, because again, remember, the gnomes only go into the easiest to enter locations that they can get to through a certain gate. So there would have to be a lot of trolls out already on the board for this to actually occur. But if the only place the gnomes were able to enter in included these 3 trolls here, then what would occur is that you would randomly select one of the 3 to die. So let's say this was the beginning of the wave or whatever into the granite section. Then you would, well, the game suggests to take those cubes that you would use in the retail version and just kind of throw them together in your hand. And then, well, let's say we'd only need 1 yellow in this instance. So you have 2 pinks and 1 yellow, and you kind of roll them around and just pick one randomly. But in doing that with the Kickstarter version, each one of these is kind of oddly shaped, so it's going to be kind of easy to feel one versus the other. So you may want to use like a dice or something to do that, but otherwise it's selected randomly. And then that first person, whoever it is that gets killed, will get that extra point. And then if gnomes continue to enter into that cavern after that, which is usually what they do. They usually kind of keep pouring in the same direction in which they're coming. Then the next person just gets that 2 points or whatever. Okay. So, breaches are going to be nasty ways of you being able to kind of knock out other people's trolls if you want to, so that they don't gain any points for their deaths and then they lose their presence on the board. And having that control with the swarm location is really, really nice to be able to move that wherever you need to. So don't be afraid to use this gnome wheel a lot, even though you're triggering breaches. There's going to be a lot of gnomes by the end of the game. So the other tripwire, though, aside from this one's this boost wire. So this is definitely a lot nicer of a boost wire. So anytime this is tripped, you move up on this little track right here. So if yellow's tripping that, then it would just go up 1 for every time that they trip that. Any time that they're taking an action that crosses over this, very first thing happens is this little boost track goes up. Now if we were taking a boost action of 2, I mean a gnome action of 2 as we crossed over here, let's say it was right here to start off with, and you landed on this little honor symbol right here, you get a number of honor points, which are your victory points or whatever for the game, equal to the power of your gnome action that you use. So if you're doing a gnome action of power 2, then you get 2 points. And that, let's say this was the beginning here and it was the first time this wire was tripped, that boost track would move up for yellow first, and they get an additional point value based on where this is at the point that they land on this symbol. So they would get 2 points for doing the gnome action, gnome power action of 2, and then they get an additional 2 for that first movement up this boost track. So then on a later round, if they go over and they did the same thing and they had a power of 2, this would move up and they would not only get 2, but 3 additional ones, so they'd score 5 when they did that. So it's a little situational. It's kind of hard to want to really focus on this when some of these other actions are, in my opinion, more powerful a lot of the time. But you could get some pretty big points with this, because if you took a really big gnome action, especially at the end of the game when you couldn't do much of anything else, you could get some kind of bonus, 9 or 10 points if you're really moving this gnome wheel around. But that's the most complicated action. That's the most complicated thing you're going to do in the game is mess with the gnome wheel. Otherwise, all of these actions are now described. There's 3 other symbols that you're going to see show up on the Ancestry board, though, which are going to include these little elder signs, these golden kind of shiny signs here. You have the supply symbols, which I think we already kind of went over those a little bit. And then you have these wild symbols here. So we'll go ahead and just reiterate, because we've already gone over it. The supply symbol just means that is where your supply tracker starts in relation to whatever round you start off with. You go to the base portion of whatever the round is. If it's round 1, it's 6. Get an additional one, so 7 during the startup. And then you can have multiple ones too that go on, but you won't ever have more than 8. The other, the elder sign here, this elder symbol, refers to a number of points that you can gain at the end of the game. So at the very end of the game, you're going to have selected 9 additional Ancestry board cards. Each one's, I don't think any of them come with more than 1 elder sign on them, but if you then had selected throughout all of your choices a card with an elder symbol every single time, you could get up to 9 of these. If you were to get all 9, you get 30 points. This is a little track that shows how those scale up. You get 30 honor points at the end of the game, which is huge. It could really tip you over and cause you to win the game, but it's really hard to get all 9, because even sometimes you just won't see all 9 show up during the draft, or the person you're playing with, even though they don't really care about elder signs symbols, maybe they're not doing anything with them, they might see that you're getting really close and they'll take that last one as a kind of a hate draft to keep you from being able to get all those points. But you can see they scale up pretty quickly, so only one elder symbol at the end of the game is only going to give you 0 points, so 2 of them give you 1, 3 gives you 3, and then they start to build up those. So once you get 6, you're getting 12 points, 7, 17, 8's 23, 9's 30. The other thing about elder symbols, though, is that they're kind of a pain in the butt to have to keep up with during the game, because they block sections, so you can never put these little action symbols on these, and you can never cover these up either. So as you're drafting on another round, you can't ever cover up these, so they're blocking your Ancestry board. So they definitely get in your way. But I've played games where you really that was heavily focused on, and it can definitely pay off. It can definitely pay off quite a bit. Even if you just get 8 of them, it's a really nice bonus at the end. So the only other symbol that we did not go over yet is the wild symbol. So as the name suggests, a wild symbol is wild. It can be any of the other symbols on the board, on this Ancestry board, except for the elder. It can't act as an elder symbol at the end, but any of the other actions that you're doing. So as if that's wild here, then we could do like a power 2 influence action with those two connected together like this. You could take that as a weak action. You could take it as any weak action. It could be a weak gnome action of 1, and here's another weak gnome action of 1. You could do that if you wanted to really spy out these places really quickly, and you'd get to do 2 separate gnome and wave card peaks if you wanted to do that. Now if you have 2 wild symbols, let's say this empty space here was also a wild symbol, at the beginning of the round before anybody takes any turns, you can actually cover those up, and they will act as a supply at that point, so you can use those to give additional supplies if you want to. But otherwise that essentially covers all of the different symbols that you're going to see on your Ancestry board and what they do. The last thing that I want to go over is the round structure. So again, as we stated, you're going to go through 3 waves, 3 rounds essentially. You're going to take turns on back and forth, or in a clockwise fashion if you've got more than 2 people. Every time you take an action, you're going to move your supply down. When you're at 0, you can't take an action anymore, and you're going to have to pass. That may just happen too if you've got extra supplies, but you have everything covered on your Ancestry board with your action tokens. So once both people have passed, we would go to the wave, and the first 2 waves, what are going to happen is we're going to go through each one of these. So we already described how the gnomes show up at each one of these sections. So we'd have a couple, we'd have all these gnomes that were on the board as it is right now would entrench. And then 2 gnomes would show up at hammers. So one would pop in here, and then one would run through that guy and pop into the next one. And we're just kind of picking that randomly for pink here. Then we go to the next one, and you can move this swarm token around if you want to. The only one that it really matters is the very last one, because that's going to affect the next person's breach. But if you want to, you can move these around the board. The instructions tell you to, but it's not really necessary. But that would have started over here for the hammers, then would have gone over to the blue section for the ice domain. We're going to put 2 gnomes in there. And at this point, these empty caverns are actually just as close as these 2. So whichever, somebody's going to end up getting to pick where that goes. We go to the third one. Granite. So again, this is where it's more important to leave the spawn, or this, I keep calling it the spawn marker, the swarm location. And so at this point, we're moving through this cavern. We don't want to move in where trolls at because there's a lot of empty caverns. So this one's only 2 away, and that one's only 2 away. So we go 1, 2, and then 1, 2, and then that wave is finished. So during a normal game, the trolls are going to be a lot more spread out. You might have some deaths that happen as those gnomes are entering into the different caverns, and so you're going to score points again based off of how many trolls get killed in each one of these waves, and the little bonus that happens on the first death. After that occurs, you're then going to count points based off of where you are at on the board. Every one of these domains that you have at least 1 cavern that you have dominance in, you will gain 6 points for it. So it really behooves you to spread out throughout the board on the first 2 rounds. In the third round, it's going to score a little differently. It's not going to matter as much. There'll still be reasons for you to want to spread out there in the third round. But in these first 2 rounds, so like if it was left just like it is right here, pink would be getting 6 points for having dominance in one of the mud locations. But any of these overrun caverns here will take away 1 point from you. So instead of 6, you would actually get 5. Same thing over here with the fire domain for yellow. Instead of 6, he would have to lose 1. Even though there's 2 gnomes here, There's only one overrun cavern, so you get a -1 point for that. Now you might have a situation like this though where she's actually spread out into multiple caverns, and so she's going to get 6 for this and 2 for each additional one. So at that point she'd have 10 minus 1, she'd get 9 points. Now if she's really spread out though, let's say she had one over here and one over here, and then she had another one over here. You're counting up, again, each one of those domains individually. So 6 points minus 1, there's 5 here, minus 1 from this one being dominated. You get another 5 here. This one, you don't worry about the other person's trolls, just the gnomes as far as negating points. So she gets 6 minus 1 from here. So you can see how you can get a pretty huge chunk of points if you can really spread out. Of course, yellow's going to be fighting for dominance in places too, so you're going to have situations where yellow's got a couple more and taking them from pink, and things like that are going to go on. So it's kind of hard to really utilize all of the domains, but you will get a big chunk of points that way if you pay attention to that as you play. So that's how the end of each wave is going to score, though. You're getting those points. You're not worrying about these great halls until the end of the 3rd round. At the end of the 3rd round, what's going to happen is that instead of scoring the points like we did for each of these caverns, you don't score points like that at all. You'll only score these great halls, and they're going to be based off of if you have a majority of dominated of the caverns that are surrounding it. So with this one, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 caverns surrounding this 8-point Great Hall, and pink has 3 of them. The gnomes actually will compete for this as well. So in this situation, the gnomes have 1, pink's got 3. Pink would get 8 points for that Great Hall. If it was set up like this instead, though, or let's say, I'm sorry, let's say we had another gnome over here. If it was set up like this and gnomes overran 2 of the caverns, pink's got 2 over here, then nobody gets those points. Similar situations are going to go on where you've got 2 sections that are being dominated with 2 different players' colors. So let's say all these gnomes weren't here. These yellows were here. Let's say these were out, and we had a couple pinks over here too. This would be equal dominance. It doesn't matter how many of the trolls are in one of these caverns to dominate them. Once there's a higher number of one color, then they just simply dominate. So nobody's going to get this 12, even if there's only 1, 2 trolls over here and there's 3 trolls over here of yellow. They're still only dominating 2 and 2. So everybody loses those 12 points. Or don't lose them, they just don't get to have them. So some of these are a little more tight, or like this one, there's only 2 around this 12-point Great Hall. And these are always going to be randomly selected at the beginning of the game. So these will change. This will be a little bit of a variation every time you play. But they're always going to be either 4, 8, or 12 points. So it's kind of an end game goal that you're looking towards. One additional thing that I'll mention is these champions are going to help you throughout the game for the first 2 and through the 3rd round. But these Wave 3 champions are a little bit different. So let's just act like all those champions have gotten cleared and we're on the 3rd wave. These guys are all about scoring points. So at the end of the waves that happen during the 3rd round, you'll see where you've gotten to as far as your influence goes. Don't forget to count up the clan board votes as well. But they're going to have like real specific ways that they get to give you a point boost at the end. So this one says like gain 3 votes distributed how you like among any non-moon clans. This one, which obviously is going to refer to getting points too, so you could really snatch some high point value tokens over there on the clan board with this one. This one's you gain 2 points for every clan where you aren't the vote leader, so there's some really situational ones there. This one says you place Grolak in an empty Great Hall. And each non-champion troll in the caverns adjacent to that Great Hall gains 1 point for its owner. So these are the Great Halls. Grolic does have a little token that comes with them, but there's no miniature or anything. It just has this little I don't know what you call it, jagged token that you place out. And so if you as you gain these guys, you'll just go left or right, and then as soon as somebody gets one that has a token like this where you're claiming a Great Hall spot, then you could choose which one that you're going to pick from there. And so there's going to be situations where maybe all of these champions that show up have one of those little tokens, and so you'll have to go one at a time, and you won't be able to take ones that have already been taken. But it's nice if you have like a bunch of trolls out and surrounding one Great Hall, and then you get Grolic, and then you're able to get an additional point for each one of your trolls. Sometimes you'll have situations like that that'll really boost you right at the end. So be aware that these Wave 3 ones are just gimmicky ways of grabbing a bunch of points at the end of the game. After you've counted up who controls and gets the points for all of the Great Halls, and you look at the clan board and you'll count up all of these each one of the tracks, see all of those points, add those onto the track as where you've been counting your points throughout the game, and then whoever has the most points at that point wins the game. And that is essentially Fall of the Mountain King in a nutshell.
And what a nutshell it is. That is Fall of the Mountain King. Now, I know this was a long video. We went over a lot of content. We essentially covered the entirety of the rulebook. So you shouldn't need the rulebook in order to play the game now, but I would still keep it nearby just in case I missed anything. If you do notice anything that I missed, please shout it out in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, you know how a couple free clicks can really help support channels like mine. And in the future, I'll be looking to make additional content that's going to include videos like these how to play videos, as well as reviews and unboxing videos. So keep an eye out, and until then, take care, enjoy your games. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.